What's up, guys? It's Keefe. In this video, I want to go over something a little bit different than I normally address, but I think it is really important to understand. And that is the fact that intellectual ideas are completely overrated. Now, before we get into that, I made this channel to help men create their ideal lives through self-mastery. So if you're guys out there looking to improve his life in any way, hit that subscribe button and bell icon. I put out new videos every single day to help you do exactly that. Now, let's get into the video. Now, I'll start this video off by explaining how I've come to this conclusion over time, because I used to be someone who was very much identified with my intellectual mind. I consider myself to be a pretty intelligent guy, and I always identified with that. I thought I was this super smart guy. I had these great ideas, but what happened is I would lay these ideas out in my life over and over again in different places, different situations, whether it's business, even things like relationships. I have an ideology I'm following on relationships, or really any other area of my life, political belief systems, things like that. I'd follow an ideology, and what would happen is nothing would happen how I expected it to work, right? I'd try this business idea. Well, this should make sense because my rational mind has come up with this great idea. I would lay it out and it would just be a complete dud. So over time, what I've come to observe is the fact that the intellectual mind really isn't all that. And we live in a society now that's very science-based, data-based, and we've all kind of been indoctrinated into the idea that your intellectual mind is the most important thing. It knows everything, and you need to have a rational opinion about everything. You need to have a rational idea why you're doing certain things. But I'm here to tell you this just doesn't always work exactly how you expect. And so one thing I've learned to do is let go of this attachment to my intellect. The main problem with your intellect is it cannot see past itself. It is so caught up in its small little world of data and observation that it just cannot see the forest for the trees, pretty much. Now, the Catholic Church knew this a long time ago, and I'm not here to promote the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic, but they did seem to be on to something with this, and this is an old truth that we have lost sight of here again in our scientific, rational society that we live in. But their idea was that the biggest rival to God was the obsession with the intellect, basically the deification of the intellectual, rational mind. Now, some people out there who are watching this might be thinking, well, that's fine because God is this, this outdated idea. He's not rational. He makes no sense. But I'm here to argue the opposite. In fact, Lucifer actually means the intellect, by the way. So this is an old idea, the idea that the most dangerous thing to God, almost like it's Antichrist, its opposite, is actually the intellectual mind. It's not this old gargoyle looking thing that's just pure evil. It's purely rational. And it's a really interesting idea, but again, I'm not saying we'd be dogmatic Catholics from the 12th century or something like that. I'm simply suggesting that perhaps the intellect has some faults and perhaps there was some ancient wisdom in these ideas. Now, in this video, when I'm talking about God, I'm not talking about any specific religion. What I'm talking about is the intelligent creator of it all. You can believe anything you want about that. I just think it's very self-evident that that's here. And that's what I'm talking about when I refer to God. I'm referring to this natural truth. There's an eternal, understanding of an order about the world we live in that is beyond our comprehension. And this is what I'm referring to. I refer to God. And what do rational, very intellectual people tend to do? They tend to butt up against nature constantly. They're always trying to live in opposite of nature rather than being a part of it, being in the flow. This is kind of like a Taoist idea as well, which is the idea that you should go with the flow of life rather than trying to go against it. But what do these intellectual types try to do? Well, you see nature, for example, it's self-evident. There are two genders. There's man and woman. They reproduce. They have kids. What do the scientific, hyper-rational types do? Now there's this gender spectrum. They're always challenging obvious truths that you don't have a rational understanding of. I don't have a rational argument for why there's two genders. I just see it's been that way from the jump and it continues to work. So there is an idea in that there's a natural truth in that's beyond your rational mind. But what do these rational people do? They butt up against it. A couple other examples, things like climate change. The earth has gone through ice ages and times when the earth had no oxygen in the air. The climate has changed, the atmosphere has changed. But we've got this very scientific class of intellectual people who are obsessed with this idea that they are kind of at the center of everything. They can solve all the problems. They're convinced that human beings are the cause of climate change, and they're convinced that they can solve all the problems of the world rather than just seeing there's apparently a natural order to to the fact that the climate changes. And this isn't supposed to be a political video or anything. I actually used to be a big believer in climate change until I came to this observation that there's just this obsession with this certain intellectual, rational type of person with butting up against just the way the world works and thinking, essentially propping themselves up as the God, right? I'm the intellect, I'm the master of the universe, I know how to solve every problem. I want to give you some examples of why this doesn't work on a grand scheme so you can understand what I'm talking about. And then I want to give you a solution to this problem because I don't want to just sit here and ramble about some philosophical beliefs of mine. I want to give you some real practical advice that you can take and make your life better. So a couple examples of why these intellectual ideas don't work. Let's start with something like population control. So in I believe it was the mid 1900s, it was like 1960, something like that. I think it was Stanford. A professor had come up with a report saying that if the population of human beings on the planet went over, I believe, 5 billion, we were going to have mass famine. People were going to die at like all over the place. The world simply was not going to be able to sustain this amount of people. So our really intellectual master of the universe types got on their high horse and decided to tell the world that we had this issue. There were too many people. And so what happened was places like China put in the one-child policy, and they killed millions of babies as a result of this policy. In India, they did mass sterilizations of people to try and limit the population. And that's just one example. And then guess what happened? We're at like 8 billion now, and everything seems to be going just fine. Another example of this is something like communism, Marxism. It's this very much this intellectual idea of like, we're so smart, we can pull all the levers and make the society function the way we want. And then they play it out, and you get 100 million dead bodies. So this is what I'm saying. Like, it sounds so great, but there's something about the rational mind that lacks context. It lacks understanding. Like, if you were strictly rational and you look at a situation and you say something like, okay, we've got too many people on the planet, that's what the data's telling me. And then you say, what's the solution? Well, we got to cut the people. So what do? You kill millions of babies. You sterilize populations. Very rational solution to a problem. But if any human being just looks at that, it's self-evident, again, the self-evident nature of things, that that's kind of fucked. You probably shouldn't kill millions of babies because you believe there's too many people on the planet. Maybe you should let go of trying to control everything. You shouldn't sterilize people. Again, with communism, you shouldn't kill millions of people to try and get in control of a government and control the food supply and control the money supply and all these things. Maybe you should let nature play itself out instead of trying to control everything. But this is not something that is comprehended by the rational mind because it sees itself as God. Now, even in me saying all of this, most people have this template, have this default setting of thinking the intellectual truth is the ultimate truth because, again, of the society we live in. This is why you'll see like religious people arguing religion against scientists in a scientific domain. Like, you're not going to win doing that because you're playing their game right off the bat. You're assuming that their truth is the universal ultimate truth rather than looking at their truth as a tool, which I find more important. And that leads me into what you should do, how you should live your life differently based on what I'm suggesting in this video. I think the best representation of what I'm talking about here is from the show Star Trek. So if those of you who've seen it, this is to me the most brilliant analogy in the history of literature. It's so brilliant. So you've got the ship, and what's the ship's journey? The ship's journey is it explores the galaxy. It explores the unknown. So the ship is a metaphor for you and your life. You go through your life, and what do? You explore new things. You try new things out, and you figure out who you are, basically. Now, inside the ship, you've got Captain Kirk, and you've got Spock, who's the first mate. Now, I actually was watching this show, and I had this thought. I was like, I wonder why Spock isn't the captain. Because Spock's the intellectual one, Spock's the rational one, Spock's the science-based, no emotion, he's just facts, logic, right? And our modern world, which glorifies logic above everything else and thinks it knows everything, you would think you'd put Spock in the captain's seat. But the intelligence of Gene Roddenberry, who made the show, to put him in the first mate position was to suggest that your rational mind is not God and it shouldn't be in the driver's seat. It's your best tool. And that's the truth of how you should live your life. You should just drive the ship. You should have an objective for where you're trying to go, and your rational mind can help you get there. Your rational mind shouldn't dictate to you what your objectives should be and how to go about them. It is merely a tool, a suggester. It is not the God, the end-all, be-all. And that switch, when you can get that into your head, start focusing on, okay, what do I want, rather than what does my ideology or my beliefs dictate that I should want. You actually ask, what do I want? And then use that logical mind to help you solve problems to get there, because it's great for that. It's great when it's not placed in the Godhead spot. It's great when it is your first servant. It's your best mate. And finally, as a rule, you should try to live in accordance with the self-evidence of nature. You're going to be in a certain experience, and rather than letting an ideology, a belief system about how the world should be, dictate the decisions you make, you should simply look at the self-evidence of things and make a decision. Be more pragmatic rather than ideological. Pragmatic is more based on observation. Okay, this appears to be true now, but I'm not making a claim about its universal truth. Ideology is like, this is the universal truth of life. Like, I mean, politically speaking, you can look at both parties. They all have ideologies. Conservatives have these free market ideology policies. Liberals have these more progressive ideological policies, and they all believe in these ideologies rather than just looking at each situation and looking at the self-evident nature of how to handle the situation. And you'll find that there's a lot more clear-cut solutions when you do that. So in summary to this video, a little bit different, a little bit rambling, not sure if you liked it or not. If you did get some value out of it, leave me a comment below. But in summary, what you should do from this video is just start aiming at something and stop letting your intellectual mind tell you how the world works, tell you what you should go after, and put it back in its proper place as a servant to you and your goals in life. And if you got something out of this video, give me a like so I can reach more guys through the algorithm. Hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.